Welcome to the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation's webinar series, Beyond the Pandemic, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. We explore why the values and practices of EDI need to be embedded in society's infrastructures. And at the core of this series are the personal narratives and experiences needed to influence how organisations, big and small, implement EDI. Our guest speakers are Dr. Simone Phipps, Associate Professor of Management in the School of Business at Middle Georgia State University, and Dr. Leon Prieto, Director of the Centre for Social Innovation and Sustainable Entrepreneurship at Clayton University, where he is also an Associate Professor of Management. Both Simone and Leon are also Associate Research Fellows with the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation.
And thanks for everyone for coming out to hear us talk about, the history of Black management in the US and how it could positively impact diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is a topic that Simone and I are very passionate about. And hopefully we won't be too long-winded in our responses.
Yes, hello everyone. As Pam mentioned, my name is Simone Phipps, and today Leon and I will be talking about how the history of Black management in the United States can positively impact diversity, equity, or equality and inclusion in business schools. And we have already been introduced, we can skip that. And so I would like to just begin by talking a little bit about diversity, equality, and inclusion in business schools. Really and truly, as I'm sure we all agree, there's a lack of diversity, equality, and inclusion in business schools. Kurana and Spender actually explain that modern business schools have this research model that encourages excessive narrowness of scope. So that research model is part of the reason that you have that narrow scope when it comes to business school that doesn't facilitate the kind of inclusion and diversity that you would want in a business school. Also, Professor Stephen Rogers, who is a former Harvard Business School MBA professor, he mentioned that the curriculum is not inclusive, and he likened the curriculum to a donut with a big hole in the middle, and talked about the absence of Black women and men who have had business success and called them the hidden fingers, and the fact that they were ignored when it comes to the curriculum in business schools. And so he actually was teaching a course where he was trying to bring to light some of the Black men and women in entrepreneurship. Also, there was Martin Parker, who wrote a very popular and controversial book, Shut Down the Business School, where he challenged academics to reevaluate how business is taught so that students can question leading assumptions, so that you can have that diverse perspective and not just be focused on what is currently the focus, which is, as we said before, very narrow. Also, some fellow colleagues of ours and good friends, Cummins and Bridgman, they also wrote an article in AMLE where they talked about the need for more diversity in business schools, and the fact that that more diversity, that increased diversity, is most likely going to foster more innovative thinking in business schools, and therefore broaden our perspectives and allow us to come up with those innovative solutions that we so desperately need. So the history of Black management in the US can really have a positive impact when it comes to increasing diversity, equality, and inclusion in business schools. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, the history of Black management in the United States, it's very unique and still very relevant to today. Unique in that the history of Black management shows the kind of challenging circumstances that Black people in the US experience. Those challenges included due to Jim Crow, and which refer to pretty much racist laws in the US that kept Black people down and segregated. Lack of educational opportunities, which led, of course, to lack of employment, and then even those who had the education, they were passed over for jobs that they deserved, lack of access to capital, which hurt with entrepreneurship and things like that. Those kinds of challenging circumstances are shown in the history of Black management. And even though things are quite improved today, Black people in the US still face similar challenging circumstances in terms of being passed over for things that they deserve. And so even though the history of Black management shows that it's still relevant because today those challenging circumstances still exist. And if you look at the history, even though there were those challenging circumstances, there was still an era of success. So between 1900 and 1930, that period is called the golden age of Black business. And so despite those challenging circumstances, very difficult circumstances, that period saw the coming up of a lot of successful Black businesses. And so we can learn a lot from the history that is presented in terms of those Black businesses if they are included in the curriculum. Apart from the history being unique and relevant, you also have a lot of rich content that you can get from the history of Black management in the US that you can include in the curriculum. Content in the form of people in management theory and practice. And so a lot of the people that have been excluded from the curriculum, from the textbooks we use, from the articles, from cases, a lot of the people had their own unique principles, management principles and theories. They had their own ideas about how management should be practiced. They had their own beliefs, their own leadership styles, etc. And so we can draw a lot from the people if we were to include them, managers, entrepreneurs, the visionaries, and the management pioneers of yesteryear in Black management. Also, if you look at the history of Black management in the US, on the education side, you can learn from teaching strategies in management education, what was done in the past among the Black community in order to teach the Black students and to prepare them for management and leadership roles. And also, thirdly, in terms of rich content, you have a number of themes in management that you can come across in the history of Black management. And it would be very useful and very relevant if you were to include those themes in the curriculum. One such theme is cooperation, and we will talk about that theme a little later on. And so for this presentation, we just want to focus on the rich content, the people in management theory and practice from history of Black management in the US, the teaching strategies, and the themes in management. And so I am going to pass it over to Leon, who is going to talk about C.C. Spalding.
All right, hi again, everyone. And as Simone just mentioned, I'm going to spend some time talking about a management pioneer that you probably never heard about because he is not present in most of the management textbooks. And this gentleman, his name is Charles Clinton Spalding. And from 1900 until his death in 1952, Mr. Spalding, he managed what was then America's largest Black business. And that business is known as the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. And that company was located in Durham, North Carolina's Black Wall Street. So some of you all probably heard about Black Wall Street, and you probably heard about it being located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And fortunately, a number of media outlets started addressing what transpired in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in their Black Wall Street. And that Black Wall Street was named by Booker T. Washington. And but one thing a lot of people don't realize, there were various entrepreneurial Black communities throughout the United States. And Durham, North Carolina had a very successful Black Wall Street. So Charles Clinton Spalding, he brought fame for himself and his city, Durham, North Carolina. And under Spalding's administration, the North Carolina Mutual, they supported a number of causes, social causes within the Black community. So they made their funds available for various social entrepreneurial projects, such as the building of hospitals, libraries, even churches, and some newspapers. And Charles Clinton Spalding, he contributed greatly to management theory and practice, right? And he came up with his own principles and philosophies of management, which was based on, we argue, African traditions and philosophies of cooperation, right? And some of these African philosophies and traditions, they survived the Middle Passage and made its way into the Americas, be it the Caribbean, be it the United States, etc., right? So he was also unofficially known as Mr. Cooperation. So it's no surprise that when he came up with his 8 fundamental necessities of management, cooperation played a central role. So he wrote this article in a newspaper known as the Pittsburgh Courier in 1927, which was at the time one of the most popular African American newspapers. And he wrote this article called The Administration of Big Business. And so Simone and I, while doing our archival research, we came across this article and we were like, my goodness, this is thought leadership from the African American community that is no way represented in the textbooks, right? And his work as it relates to outlining his own principles of management, it predated Henry Fayol's principles of management and 4 functions of management. Fayol's work didn't get translated from French to English not until the 1940s. So Spalding, he came up with these 8 fundamental necessities of management in 1927. So it predated the work of Fayol and also Chester Barnard, who wrote a book called Functions of the Executive. So one of his first fundamental necessities dealt with cooperation and teamwork. And as we said previously, this is not surprising because cooperation plays a central role in communities of African descent, So this pretty much embodies a team-based culture focused on overall team success and cooperation to achieve goals. And another fundamental necessity of management was authority and responsibility. And he talked about the importance of accountability among all managers and employees to ensure performance. And like some of the other management thought leaders like Frederick Taylor and Mary Parker Follett, Spalding saw the need for a focus on division of labor, which basically entails a separation of tasks in a firm to increase efficiency and effectiveness. And he also talked about adequate manpower. So he scolded historically Black colleges and universities to do better as it relates to integrating theory and practice. And he encouraged them to utilize like a business laboratory, which will incorporate experiential learning to give students hands-on training. And then he also talks about the need for adequate capital, the need for feasibility analysis, advertising budget. And he also talked about the importance of conflict resolution because cooperation is key. One of his other writings was in 1937, where he outlined his 4 cardinal points of entrepreneurship. And he talked about the importance of having character, so it's always appreciated if you have an entrepreneur who was honest, who was disciplined, has integrity. So he understood the importance of this. He also talked about the importance of fundamental business principles. And what Spalding meant by that, he felt that entrepreneurs should have a particular knowledge in an area before pursuing it as a business venture. And it always helps to have some type of experience in any given field before you pursue it as a venture. That makes it a lot easier. He talked about the importance of cash flow management, and that is still a very important topic as it relates to entrepreneurship. And he also talked about the importance of social service in business. So basically, he was talking about social service in business long before people were talking about social entrepreneurship. So him talking about that, it pretty much showed his understanding of the need for corporations to engage in social entrepreneurial behavior to positively impact their community. And there are a lot of questions today about capitalism not being inclusive and compassionate. And we believe that Spalding and some other Black business pioneers during the golden age of Black business who really incorporated these philosophies of cooperation really saw an opportunity to make capitalism in its unbridled form, or try to make it more compassionate instead of just being unbridled capitalists. And as we can see today, capitalism is contributing to a number of societal ills, right?
Okay, moving on with the people in management practice, I would like to talk about Magelina Walker. And she was based in Richmond, Virginia. She was actually the daughter of a former slave. And she went through a lot of dire circumstances growing up, but she always believed in education, and especially for progress and advancement when it came not just to her Black community, but for Black women in particular. And so she did a lot of her work with the hope of increasing opportunities for the Black community, and especially Black women who really didn't have the kinds of opportunities that they should have, even though they deserved them. So things like what they call, the jobs like stenographers or telephone operators that many Black women would have been able to get if jobs were given on the basis of who is deserving or who is able, has the ability or capability of doing it. They were overlooked for those jobs. And so Magelina Walker, she was a visionary. She was an entrepreneur. She initiated and managed a number of business ventures, one of which was the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank. So she was the first Black woman in the United States to charter and own a bank, of which she was also president. And the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank was a social enterprise that facilitated the economic and social advancement of the Black community. So in terms of economic and social development, for example, the bank was able to help with not just people being able to save money, Black people being able to save money in order to build businesses, for example, but it also helped in terms of home ownership. So Black people were able to own homes at a much higher rate when the bank was started, which was a significant achievement in the community at that time. Also, the bank was able to provide employment opportunities. Another of the enterprises she was in charge of was the St. Luke Emporium. The Emporium was a department store which provided quality goods for the Black community at affordable prices. And it also provided jobs, again, employment opportunities that were in such a short supply for Black people and especially Black women. She also initiated the St. Luke Herald, which was a newspaper, and it highlighted a lot of the struggles of the Black community in her day, spoke against lynching and segregation, advocated educational opportunities, equal educational opportunities, and a lot of the other atrocities that the Black community were facing, tried to highlight it. She was also a suffragist, meaning that she was fighting for voting rights for women and for Black women and for the Black community as well. So a lot of her initiatives were business initiatives, but some would also fall in the realm of social service initiatives as well, or non-profit initiatives as well. So she was another person that believed in cooperation. Leon mentioned C.C. Spalding and him thinking about cooperation and believing in cooperation. She also believed in cooperation, and she was a very articulate speaker. She gave a lot of speeches around the country, and she talked a lot about banding together. There's a specific speech actually that was entitled Unity, Race Unity, and she talked about race being like a big family, and just like you want family unity, as a Black community, they needed to come together and have that unity and cooperate, work together in order to build businesses and to make a better life for themselves. So she also did believe in cooperation and unity. So those two people we're going to talk about today. And we also wanted to talk a bit about the strategies, the teaching strategies in management education that you can learn from the history of management. And one of those strategies we can learn from would be what we would call the Bluefield Experiment. And Leon is also going to talk about the Bluefield Experiment with Mr. Matney.
Okay, and I'll be pretty brief about this. So recently, myself, Simone, Neil Stott at Cambridge, and Lilia Guini, we got a paper published in the Academy of Management, Learning and Education, which is a journal focused on management education practices. And we decided to do this paper based on Black history in the United States. And we looked at the influence of W.E.B. Du Bois, the influence he had on a professor by the name of William Matney. And William Matney was one of the first Black MBAs from Harvard Business School. And he was very much interested in economic cooperation among African Americans, and specifically cooperative economics. He was very interested in starting cooperatives. So he took a job at Bluefield Institute, which is now known as Bluefield State College, which is a HBCU based in West Virginia. And to integrate practice and theory together, he and the students, they started this student cooperative store where they sold products, but they utilized the cooperative business model, which is a more democratic form of entrepreneurship, where people could pool their funds together. Everyone who invests in it has a vote, so it's a very democratic form of enterprise. So he pioneered with his students by starting this student cooperative, and it was very successful. The cooperative lasted for like 10 years, from 1924 to 1934, until the state of West Virginia shut it down, right? And it's possibly due to racism and also white supremacy in general, right? And they made the excuse that they didn't want the cooperative competing with private enterprises. So there was a history of cooperatives facing challenges from private corporations. And there's opportunities for historically Black colleges today, especially within the business schools, to incorporate the cooperative business model within the curriculum, because business schools today never focus on cooperatives. There are no universities in the United States that really teaches the cooperative business model in a robust way. Can you move on to the next slide? All right.
Okay, so as Leon mentioned earlier, cooperation, it stems from the traditions, African traditions that followed, that moved across to the US, and that were practiced in history of management as well. And so among the rich content that you can include in the curriculum, you have the people with their leadership styles, their theories, their principles, their practices. You have the teaching strategies like the Bluefield Experiment, and then also the themes in management that you can include in the curriculum. And cooperation is one of them. And so as we mentioned earlier when we talked about C.C. Spalding and about Magelina Walker, cooperation was prevalent among Black business leaders, managers, and entrepreneurs during that golden age of Black business. And it's a theme that is very relevant today and that can be very useful today. Leon mentioned Ubuntu being that spirit of cooperation that can be loosely translated to mean I am because we are. And there are 3 core tenets of Ubuntu, and we want to mention those as well. They are spirituality, consensus building, and dialogue. And so when Leon and I envisioned this idea of integrating cooperation into organizations and seeking or striving for that cooperative advantage, we envisioned it as, and we defined it as the benefits that an organization can possess or accrue due to its people-centered approach to engendering those 3 tenets of Ubuntu: spirituality, dialogue, and consensus building, for the benefit of all stakeholders, whether you are employees, customers, or the community at large. And so it's important to note that spirituality is not necessarily religion. A lot of times people think of religion when you talk about spirituality, but spirituality is more about seeking people's well-being. And so when you're striving for cooperative advantage and you want to focus on that as an organization, whatever organization you are part of, you want to think about your stakeholders' well-being. What is it that they need in order to be okay? Also, the idea of dialogue is very important, and dialogue has to do with conversational sensibility. And for that to happen, you need to make sure that everyone is included. You want to make sure that dialogue is also intentional. So it can't be just talking just to say you're talking or having a conversation, but you have to be intentional about your dialogue and let people give their opinions, their recommendations, their suggestions, share ideas with people so they can give their feedback, etc., and let people know what your intentions are so that they can give feedback on that. And then based on dialogue, which is the foundation of consensus building, which is the 3rd tenet, that dialogue, then you can build on that to come to an agreement. So consensus building is about that collaborative agreement that you should be striving for after engaging in the dialogue or the conversational sensibility. You're trying to reach that an agreement in order to make sure that there's well-being for all parties. And so that's what we mean when we talk about cooperative advantage. So this is just a letter that was sent to Dubois from Matney. Leon talked about the Bluefield Experiment and how Matney was influenced by Dubois and his ideas about economic cooperation. And so there was a dialogue between the 2 parties as they tried to figure out, what is best for the Black community and how we can engage, how they could engage with the Black community to encourage that kind of economic cooperation that they needed. And so it's important to note that the history of Black management in the United States can definitely play an important role in decolonizing the business school curriculum. So that is really the positive impact that the history of management, Black management in the US can have when it comes to fostering or promoting diversity, equality, and inclusion. We're really talking about decolonizing the curriculum, making sure that there's more of other perspectives in the curriculum than there is as well. Get rid of the donut with the big hole in the middle. You're trying to expand perspectives, get rid of the narrowness of scope. And so this unique, relevant, and rich history can provide needed content for management education as well as management practice. And so if you draw from the people, from the history of Black management, you draw from the teaching strategies in the history, you draw from the themes that you can bring out. And cooperation is what we talked about today, but there are other themes as well. You can think about the idea of care and the idea of social service, as Leon mentioned with Spalding. And so there are a lot of other themes that you can bring into the curriculum from the history as you try to decolonize. And so that is very important. And we think that that should be a goal moving forward for business schools. So I think our time is up. So that marks the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. And feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and/or Twitter.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you, Leon, for that. Much appreciated. One of the questions that I wanted to ask was, this is brilliant what you're doing, and of course, you're working really hard to make sure that we know about the Black history management, particularly of the US. But how keen are business schools to implement what you're telling people, what you're teaching us?
You're asking how can they implement it?
More important, well, not just how they can, but how keen are they to?
Oh, okay. Well, there's this little term I became familiar with during the Black Lives Matter protests after the death of George Floyd, called performative allyship. So there are a number of universities, institutions claiming, they're going to focus on racial equity and all these things. But our criticism is that many of them, they just say certain things in the moment, I guess, to appease, their stakeholders and so forth, but they don't really walk the walk, so they may say, we're putting things in place, but from my opinion, I think it's all performative, right? And there are some who are, trying, to make some changes, but to me, it's all superficial, right? And to really decolonize a business school, it's more than just changing the name of a business school. For example, what happened with Cass Business School in London, right? But you got to go further than that. You got to go into the curriculum. You got to go into addressing racial capitalism, right? Capitalism currently, unbridled capitalism, is causing a lot of societal ills as it relates to climate change, as it relates to the atrocities we see within global supply chains, within the global South, right? So racial capitalism is not just impacting African Americans, it's impacting many communities in the global South, be it in the continent of Africa, be it in Bangladesh, be it in India, etc. And so business schools have to really grapple with how capitalism in its unbridled form is hurting the well-being of and the social sustainability of many communities. And it is high time that they that they actually take the necessary action to address the curriculum and really tackle some of these uncomfortable topics that they have been uncomfortable to talk about. They've been sticking their heads in the sand like ostriches, so it's time to address this.
Just as Leon mentioned, with it being very surface level, one of the things that business schools might do to avoid getting into the actual content or adding it to the curriculum, because they may have as one of their core values diversity, or want to put out there in a statement on the website that they care about diversity or equality or inclusion, they may have a little events, for example, where students can decide to sign up and come talk or listen to a panel or something like that. And that is all well and good, or they may have a speaker come in, and that's all well and good, but that's like a one-time event. So you need something more robust in the business school, in the curriculum, where all the students, not just Black students, because everybody, all students can benefit from a different perspective. And so you want the Black students to be able to learn about their history, but you also want white students to be able to learn about history and to learn from history. And so that when they go out there into the work world, that they are going to have that broadened perspective and be able to make the decisions that will cause real change, because a lot of world leaders are nurtured within business schools. And so if they don't learn these things in business schools, then they are going to be at a deficit when it comes to being out there and making the decisions, being well informed, more comprehensively informed about business strategies, management strategies, different perspectives.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much, Leon and Simone. I follow your work avidly, so thank you for taking the time today. Secondly, I apologize for my camera not being on. I have to sacrifice being able to join in or you seeing my face. I think you will all be pleased that you can't see my face right now.
Okay.
And my question was exactly what Pamela asked around how receptive business schools have been to this. To your message and generally about impact. But the follow-up question that I have on that, which links to it exactly because you've touched on it already, is around how do you handle resistance? Because usually in this area, you find that you're preaching to the choir. It's people that are interested, that attend these sessions, it's universities that have people that are already doing a lot of work that invite you to come and talk. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling virtuous cycle. How do you address those that are resistant? Or so for instance, I think I heard about a business, not a business school specifically, but a university being set up in Austin, Texas, that is coming against all this message and all this talk, and what they're doing is to counter some of these arguments. And one of the things they are heavily resistant about is decolonizing the curriculum. So I was wondering how you tackle some of this and if you have suggestions on how to do it better, especially for us in the UK, we're a bit far behind.
It's
Simone.
no, I was just going to say it's interesting that she mentioned UK being far behind. The US is still quite far behind too. In fact, the more that we have found anyone really trying to make a difference, really, to me, it has been universities outside of the US. For example, you know, universities in Canada, for example, seem to be very interested, some universities. And so to address your question about resistance, that is going to be a very hard thing to tackle, because some people are stuck in their ways and in their thinking. And I think the problem is that they already have a mindset that the way things are and the way things are taught is the right way, and that it's not supposed to change. And they're not open-minded enough to listen to someone else's perspective or explanation about why it needs to change. And so they just stick with that. And then there are other people who are misinformed that come against it, and they jump on that bandwagon and continue with that resistance without being open to it. And so to fight against that resistance, we really have to keep trying to keep the dialogue open and trying to explain. And we really need the true allies to also come forward, because we do have genuine allies who are non-Black people. And the movement of trying to decolonize can be very assisted by true allies. So Leon talked about performative allyship. What we need is a genuine, authentic allies to also speak on behalf of this. And so, for example, I mentioned Cummins and Bridgman, Todd Bridgman and Steve Cummins, and their article about diversity, increasing innovative thinking. And they have served a great deal in terms, helped us and supported us and been our allies in terms of getting our message out and spreading it as well. And so I think that one of the ways you can try to tackle the resistance is by trying to get the true allies on your side and trying to help spread that message as well. That's just one way.
Yeah, for every 10 critics, there's always an ally. And we've been fortunate to have MIT Sloan Management Review, Harvard Business Review, Cambridge Judge Business School, all serving in very important roles, amplifying our work and our voices. And there'll always be critics. And to be honest with you, I'm an academic. I'm used to rejection. We get rejected all the time. So it doesn't really faze me much at all, so I just continue to speak passionately about this topic. And I have a lot of hope with this new generation of entrepreneurs, managers, social change agents. Some of you are here right now, and you all will be leading organizations, and some of you are currently in leadership roles. And so I'm pretty confident that in the next normal, things are going to be different. There are many of us who are passionate about fixing capitalism. And so I am not deterred one bit from the critics and anyone who's trying to derail us from what we're trying to do.
Just quickly, in the chat, Marsha King has said, it would seem HBCUs business schools would be an ideal place to begin incorporating these tools if they aren't already. Do you know if any of them are already or trying to, and if so, in what capacity?
Oh, that's a great question, Marsha. You would think they'll be doing so, right? But actually, many HBCUs have a lot of work to do as it comes to decolonizing the curriculum. There's only one HBCU that we know of that is actually introducing a class on the history of Black entrepreneurship, and that's Morehouse College. And the professor who introduced that class is actually a white man, Dr. Keith Hollingsworth, and he's a good acquaintance of ours. We work together in various capacities. So Morehouse is in a process of trying to decolonize their curriculum, not just in the business school, but in other fields as well. But and we have actually reached out to a number of HBCUs about our work, and sadly, we haven't received the type of support that I expected. You know, so it might be slow, you know, because people are so ingrained in teaching capitalism the way it's always been taught, you know, and we all know change is a very difficult process. But we are hopeful and we are optimistic, and we're going to continue speaking loudly, and I might speak a little bit more sternly than Simone in terms of trying to get universities, especially historically Black universities, who has traditionally played a very prominent role in educating African American and also African leaders in history. For example, Kwame Nkrumah, from the first president of Ghana, he got his education from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. This is one of the first HBCUs, and he learned African history at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, United States, more so than he ever did when he grew up in Ghana. So HBCUs have a very important role to play in educating people of color about their own histories. So I really hope they take up this charge and decolonize.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I wanted to maybe enlarge a bit the conversation and move it to a very disturbing trend right now in the US, the conversation regarding critical race theory, which we know has become increasingly violent in what was what was once the most boring meeting on earth, like the PTA, right. Meetings. Now those parents' town halls have become just breeding ground for white supremacy at this white supremacy rhetoric at this point. It cost the Democrats the election in Virginia for governor, and it is not that of course we should be absolutely implementing these tools in business schools, but it feels that in terms of the wider conversation, we're somehow going backwards at this point because of all the politics involved. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that and how you see a way moving forward, because I am someone that watches these issues and evolutions very close, and I'm honestly quite depressed at this moment watching the news coming out of the US.
It is quite disturbing. It really is. And the thing about critical race theory is that a lot of the people who are speaking out against it and are so angered by it being taught in schools don't even understand what critical race theory is. You know, they say it's divisive, and for some reason they think that it is, you know, this construct that has been formed to make people who are white feel guilty, and that's it. But they haven't done their research, about what it is, the history of it, what it stemmed from, and what it actually acknowledges. It just acknowledges that race matters. It should not matter, but it's just factually saying, if you look at the systems in the world, if you look at political systems, if you look at the educational system, the legal system, race matters. And people of color are the ones that are negatively impacted by race. And it just acknowledges that fact. And so when people decide that it shouldn't be taught in schools, of course it is absurd, because you need to have education. And I liken it when this idea of trying to shut people up about critical race theory, I liken it, I think about Germany and their education system. I'm very pleased in that they try to not cover up what happened with the Nazis and the Jews. They actually teach it in schools. This happened. This is the history. It was wrong. It was unacceptable. And moving forward, we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I think that that is the kind of model we need to liken ourselves to in the US. Slavery is part of history. Racism is part of our history. Segregation, it was unacceptable. It is unacceptable. And moving forward, we don't want this to happen. And so part of education is letting that happen. And in order to move forward, you just need people to keep fighting and to keep, not give up and just say, okay, they say they don't want us to talk about it, so let's not talk about it. I don't know if you're referring to the same story, but I saw I think it was a school principal in Texas who resigned based on that. I saw that recently. So unfortunately, people are actually losing jobs because of teaching something that is just based in reality, and so you just have to keep the good fight, and you speak truth. You know that saying, speak truth to power. You have to continue educating people and hope that eventually people listen, people understand, they try to understand, and they don't just dismiss things because it's easy to dismiss it, or because, they feel bad and want to suppress it, that they're willing to learn from the past and to do the right thing moving forward.
And to your point also, and scholars and practitioners who incorporate critical race theory, Simone and I, our recent paper with Neil and Lilia, it incorporated critical race theory. There are some people who will pay the price, Chances are I will never probably get a job offer from a predominantly white research intensive university in the US because my work is too Black. And that is just me paying the price. But guess what? It is what it is. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I'm going to do. And some of us will pay the price and we will win the fight. Ignorance will only prosper for so long. We will win this fight. And I am not deterred whatsoever. I will continue to incorporate critical race theory. I've already encountered people. One time this person put a post on my LinkedIn telling me I should be ashamed of myself based on an article we wrote because we dared to say that a lot of business schools exclude the voices of Black and brown people within the curriculum. He said I should be ashamed of myself. They just didn't. He said some of the earlier management textbook writers just didn't know. I was like, in my mind, I was like, you're an idiot, because one of the reasons they don't know is because, people didn't take the time to really understand our own philosophies and histories, and they didn't care because they were the dominant group and we were invisible. And because of our history of being oppressed within the United States and other parts of the global South, no one gave a damn, excuse my French, so there'll always be idiots like that. They're a dime a dozen, but they just get me more fired up,
Yeah, there are some people too who may liken decolonizing the curriculum or including more diverse thoughts and perspective to affirmative action. I have seen that as well on posts on Twitter, where they say, you're just trying to stick in people. The insinuation is that they don't deserve to be included, and so we just put them in because we think we have a right to see someone that looks like us, and therefore it's affirmative action. So we do get comments like that, but you try to not let it affect you, and you move on.
Well, I let it affect me. I let it encourage me to write more papers about it.
Well, you can let it affect you positively, not to let you get it done. That's what I mean, negatively affect you.
We appreciate the point that people-centered approach using the cooperative advantage in the three principles: spiritual, consensus building, and dialogue. But to be honest, in practical side, with people from different race or different background or culture, with the limited constraint, like the resources constraint, money constraint, or time constraint, how can this cooperative advantage implement in different project or different implementation? Do you have any wisdom that you can teach us in doing this in the practical side, while we are fighting to the private sector and doing some social business or social entrepreneurs idealistic way?
So there will always be constraints, regardless of what business you engage in. And yes, time will be a factor. Money is a resource that's going to be a factor, but it comes in, you have to prioritize. And so when you're determining your priorities, if you are thinking that, yes, and we're not, when we talk about unbridled capitalism, we don't mean that profit doesn't matter, or let's all just sacrifice profits and make losses. No, we understand profit matters, but what we're saying is that we need to think about the humanistic side, in that you can make decisions and prioritize so that you make a profit, but still think about people. And so you can make decisions, for example, where a business might decide, let's say the owner wants to have an extravagant lifestyle with a private plane or a ridiculously expensive office and the best in the office? Or can they think about the well-being of employees and raise the salaries for a little bit, or the wages, if it's a wage kind of compensation that they're using? So where can you have give and take, so that you can think about the well-being of everyone? And even if you, in your decision making, if you are the decision maker and you can't figure out how to make this work, that's where the dialogue comes in. You engage with your employees and say, I would like to think about what you all need, what you all want. And if you tell me what you all need and what you all want, and I think that it's not possible because of a lack of resources, how about you find a way to make it possible and share it with me? So we learn about things like open book management, for example. Some organizations practice that. So if you use an open book management where you share financials with employees and you're transparent about all the goings on of a business, and you say, I know that you all want certain benefits, but I don't think that we can afford to give you all certain benefits that you all want. But if you can find a way to show me where these benefits can be made a possibility, where you think we can cut back to make these a possibility. And so that's the idea of cooperation and striving for that cooperative advantage. Yes, you're the leader, but you're not going to have all the answers. And so if you engage everyone, you have that dialogue with everyone, and you're really trying to move towards consensus building, where you listen to feedback, give people a chance to be included and to have a voice, and really share what they need for their well-being, and you take that into consideration, then it's possible to work.
Yeah, it's going to be hard because, for example, the recent United Nations conference on climate change, a lot of companies have a long road ahead. We have to make some very tough decisions to reduce scope 1 to 3 emissions that's polluting our environment. And it will require corporations and their value chains having meaningful engagement to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to tackle this issue of climate change? How are we going to tackle economic injustice? How are we going to tackle whatever the societal ill is? It requires meaningful and robust conversations, and it may take the form, it may be different based on the context you're in, but it is required and it is going to be hard, right? But there's no one size fits all approach when it comes to this. So cooperative advantage is like a general framework that will get the ball rolling as it relates to having these meaningful engagements to tackle a number of these grand challenges we are facing.
I just wanted to mention an example pertaining to what Robert said as well. I came across an example of a CEO. I want to say his company was Gravity Payments. His name was, I think it's Dan Price. And I came across an article recently where he realized that some employee was working 2 jobs, and he decided that it was unacceptable and pretty much raised the minimum wage, where every employee was making $70,000 a year, including himself. Now that is a huge, a really huge sacrifice that he made. And I think that is one of the greatest examples you could give of cooperative advantage and well-being, thinking of somebody else's well-being instead of yourself. So he could have easily said, you know, I don't have the money, the resources are limited, but he decided to actually put himself in the shoes of someone else and say, you know what, I could be making a lot more money. It's my company, but I too am going to take $70,000. I'm not saying that every business owner or every CEO should take a pay cut like that, a drastic pay cut. But I think that was a really good example of someone thinking about well-being of employees and deciding to change the culture of his organization where everybody mattered.
We are past the hour now, but I do have actually one more question I want to ask both of you to wrap this up. I'm not sure, Leon, I think you're a bit of a cricket fan, are you?
That's a sore topic for me right now, being a West Indies cricket fan, you know. But yes, I'm a cricket fan. Yes.
Well, I'm sorry to bring you heartache with your team at the moment, but the reason I bring it up is that the Yorkshire Cricket Board in the UK is facing a lot of difficulties. There've been allegations of racism. They're now
heard about it.
Yeah, going on in front of the Department of Culture, Media and Sports. And the reason I bring it up is because I've read articles, I've heard people talking on the news, and you know, I have it's really bad for my mental health. I tend to look at comments. You know, you don't look at comments, and you're like, why am I reading these vile statements from people? But one of the themes that has recurred constantly is the question of, well, why do it now? Why tell everybody now? Why didn't you do it before when it happened? And I wonder if that idea of why do this now? Why push for the history of Black management to be taught in schools now is ever questioned? Why not, does anybody come to you and say, well, why didn't you do it before? What's the big deal now?
Well, you know, I believe in the fierce urgency of now, first and foremost. But you know, in the past, when I was a student, I was kind of critical of the curriculum. I was like, okay, there's nothing relating to Black and brown people, ideas from the global South, ideas from other parts of the world. There was absolutely nothing. But while in school, you know, I lacked the power and all these things. So I was just learning as I go, paying attention to the deficiencies within the curriculum. And then I was waiting on that specific moment, you know, to strike, right, in terms of our research. And when Simone and I published our book African American Management History in 2019, to be honest, we didn't hear much from anyone. You know, it was like we published a book and nothing, right? Then fast forward until the death of George Floyd. Then all of a sudden, it seemed as if the whole world was interested in Black and brown people. and our work just exploded all of a sudden, right? And it was partially what that was because of the moment we were in, right? And but it's sad to see that it took the death of George Floyd and a lot of racial injustices against people that look like me to pretty much spur on an interest into decolonizing work that we're doing, and also just the history of Black enterprise. It's sad to see that it took that at that specific moment in time to really facilitate all of these discussions we are having now. So timing plays a role, you know, because there are times where there were some conversations that were just taboo, you know. So for example, critical race theory might be a taboo in some quarters right now, but in the future, in a couple of years from now, we're going to look back and be like, what was the big deal? You know, things are going to change, right? I don't know if Simone have anything to contribute as well.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the fierce urgency of now. And right when you said that, I was at the same time thinking there's no time like the present. Why not now? You know? And so it wasn't done in the past. And you can't say why now, in my opinion. I think you have to say, okay, it wasn't done in the past, but it's time to do it now. So I think the more important thing to focus on would be, we have an opportunity now. And so how do the correct question would be, how can we best use this opportunity now in order to spread the message and to get people to change their thinking and to think about everyone, not just self and the individual, but to think of community, you know, those that who may not be doing as well as we are, you know, in different countries, in our own countries, and spread the wealth. You know, it's not that we have anything against making a dollar or capitalism. It's the unbridled capitalism, and, you know, not thinking of anyone else or making the dollar at the expense of someone else is what we think the problem is.